Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was March 1st, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico. And this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt Cara Compagnona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Well, first of all, we are now in March, and no more of those lovely double Fs for February. I'm going to miss those fun double Fs. But luckily for us, in the final sign-off to today's document, there is a double F, but it is actually part of this, oh gosh, I don't even know what you call them. They're these little phrases. I'm trying to get to the bottom of this, and actually the Latin group that I mentioned yesterday is going to help out with this. There's these series of little phrases that occur at the end of the documents, and it's sometimes there's a name, and sometimes it's not a name, and they're usually like 1, 2, or 3 words long, and they've been a little bit of a mystery to me. Sometimes I can figure out, okay, it's just one person's name, but how does it relate to the person who is signed off on the probatum at the bottom as saying, this, I'm authorizing this document? Is it somehow related to the format of the actual letter that got sent out, the original copy? So I'm trying to get to the bottom of that. But hey, if you're feeling not quite ready to let go of the double Fs of February, well, hopefully the very last couple words of today's document will help you to gradually release yourself from the joy of seeing the double F of February, because that's it. No more February 1387. All right, well, that was a little somber, but what I can tell you about today's document is that it's kind of heartwarming. And this document is basically authorizing an old age pension. So there was this guy named Dominico Lull, and the header above the letter or document, it's really more of a document, not a letter. The heading has the name Dominico Lull with the P and the curl around to the left for pro. So that heading reads for Dominico Lull. And as you get into this document, you realize that Dominico Lull is a bailiff, or I should say was a bailiff in Valencia, who was a loyal and trusted bailiff for the state in the city of Valencia for many years, and has now reached old age. And this document authorizes a pension for him so that he can live out the rest of his years after his loyal service in comfort and have some kind of pension to help him meet his expenses. So this is a social service document. It's super interesting to see. it's not representative. There were not old age pensions for everybody. You really had to have a high up government job in order to have an old age pension. But it's kind of neat to see this old age pension sort of a social safety net, at least for somebody in the Middle Ages. And just to have this evidence of a kind of kindness, a kind of reward for service that comes from years of loyalty, I just think that it's a nice, sweet moment in the documentation. Now, I'm romanticizing it when I go into it like that. It's totally possible that Dominico Lull was a terrible person and was a total jerk and exploited people. And maybe one of the reasons why he was such a good bailiff was because he was using muscle in order to extort people to pay up. So we can't assume that just because somebody is getting an old age pension that they were, loyal, trusty, and all of these positive qualities. But it's possible, right? And so that's just the kind of check that I need to put on myself whenever I get a little bit teary-eyed in a document. And I'm actually teary-eyed because it's like full-on allergy season in Albuquerque right now. So it's not exactly connected to Dominico Lull and his old age. Let's talk about how old age is referred to. Let's do a bit of a close reading of this document. So in line 10, about 3 words in, is the word senio. Senio. And then the word after that is pregravitatus. So senio is in the ablative. It could also be in the dative. I think it's clear here that it's in the ablative, and I think, I didn't look it up ahead of time. I think pregravitas is also, I'm so, trying to remember these Latin case endings, because there's different forms of nouns, different categories of nouns called declensions, and you gotta know which is which. All right, so, but I think actually this is more of like a verb. Oh my gosh. This phrase means weighed down by age. Yeah, so pregravitas. Pregravatus is some kind of verb form. And the phrase basically is a elegant, metaphorical way of saying you're really too old to do the work anymore. It's kind of a nicer way of saying enfeebled. And so senio here is the ablative for agedness, you can say. And then pregravatus is a verb form for saying weighed down. So you can start to kind of see the English descendant from these Latin words, right? Because in pregravatus we have the English word gravity for something about weight. And then, of course, in senio, if you just put an R in English at the end of those letters, you have the word senior. So that was a really great opportunity to draw out some kind of Latin to English lineage there, and also to pull out a little bit of an idiomatic expression that really clarifies that all of this is about an old age pension. I did not pinpoint this on my own. Like, if you're having this idea that I suddenly got amazing at Latin and just read through this and then pulled out that phrase as the important one, that would be inaccurate because my Latin is nowhere near good enough just to kind of skim through that, all this dense writing and then flag that right away. In fact, senio, in my mind, wasn't immediately connected to the word for old man in Latin, which is senex, which is one of the first words you learn if you're studying Latin. It's one of your initial set of vocab that you get introduced to if you're starting out with Latin, senex. So I didn't make that connection, and so guess who it was? It was AI. Yeah. So I was remarking to my dissertation advisor, Dr. Gibbs, the other day that it's like this podcast is somehow turning into like a journal of the usefulness of AI as it develops and as new versions come out and as people learn how to use it. And it's almost like there's a shadow podcast about the AI. But really, the whole idea of the historian's notebook is to think about the different tools historians have when they initially encounter documents as they're trying to figure out their argument about what happened in the past. And also to put together in their mind some kind of narrative. So there's all sorts of tools that historians have used, and these new tools with AI are ones that are really shaking things up in the way that we can see demonstrated in today's episode. And here's Shadow to say hi. Come on up, Shadow. All right. So what I did for this one is, as I've talked about how I've been frustrated sometimes by Gemini, because occasionally, I know that's my frustration, Shadow's frustrated too. Sometimes Gemini comes out with a wonderful transcription of this 14th century Gothic secretarial hand, and other times it doesn't. So what I decided to do as a process that I'm going to stick with for a little while, a couple weeks or something, is I'm actually using more than one AI in order to help out. So I'm starting with Gemini and getting a transcription. Then I'm moving to Claude and having Claude do an original transcription, which is never as good as Gemini. But then Claude seems to be better. I know. Claude seems to be better. Would you please? Okay, I paused the recording so that Shadow could finish telling me what she needed to tell me. And I think she's happy now, having communicated what she needed to. She's still here, so we'll see what happens. All right, what was I saying? Claude is better at thinking through the corrections to the transcription. So Gemini is better at the initial figuring out of the alphabetical characters written in the Gothic secretarial hand. Gemini is better at expanding the abbreviations. Claude is better at catching some things that don't quite make sense. And the process for today's document is actually a great example of that. So I had Claude do an initial transcription of this document based on the image that I uploaded. It was not good. And then I put in Gemini's transcription and said to Claude, hey, here is a transcription from another source, and please compare it to what you did and to the original image, and then reconcile these as best you can. That is a process that Claude handled very well. And so from there were some important corrections. For some reason, and this is really, this I think is super interesting when we start to think about how large language models work and how they're all operating from recognizing patterns. For some reason, Gemini actually inserted the word militi, the word for knight or soldier, into the document. It's so weird. Like, there's no there it's not in there at all. But in the first few lines, Gemini inserted the word militi in front of the name of Dominico Lull, because it recognized in a lot of this other stuff that if we're talking about like an old age pension, maybe it even kind of went back to my earlier document from a couple days ago with Berengar Dolms, who in that one there was a militi, a knight. So yeah, Gemini inserted that in there. And it's like, why are you violating the definition of the word transcription? Transcription in no way can be interpreted as insert some words. But I guess, if you're expanding abbreviations, you're inserting some letters. I don't know. But that was a really interesting output that I noticed from Gemini. So Claude identified that and said, there's no word militi in the document, and so I'm going to remove that as I reconcile the transcription that I did with the transcription that you have provided me from another source. And what I will say is that both Gemini and Claude identified this as a document that initiates an old age pension for Dominico Lull. And both of them pulled out senio praegravatus as a key phrase that identifies Dominico Lull as old and in that category for receiving an old age pension. So it was a really interesting experiment with the large language model AI chatbots, and we'll see what happens as I continue to use that process. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, like who got the old age pensions and who didn't, I'm really curious about that. But we don't have the answer from this document. If you have questions like that, I've done my job. Because remember, the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.